guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's YouTober video, I'm going to be sharing my top favorite podcasts with you guys. I've become an avid podcast listener over especially the last probably year or so, but definitely over the last 2 years, I have become a much bigger podcast listener. I recently got a Jeep, which I am obsessed with. But since getting that, I actually can access my podcast directly from the app in my car, which is so crazy. I just want to share my top podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts more for personal development and personal growth. So if that's something you're interested in, then definitely just keep watching. If you're not already, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'm uploading a video every single day in the month of October for YouTober. With that being said, let's jump right into my top podcasts. Okay, so I am going to show you guys my screen as I'm going through this too, just so you can get an idea of what each of the podcasts look like. I know sometimes when I use the podcasts app in my iPhone, I get a little it's hard for me to find podcasts sometimes. So I thought it would be easier to just show you what podcast I listen to. So the first one I want to talk about is the Coffee Talk podcast. So this is, it's called Kalyn's Coffee Talk. Again, I know I've talked about Kalyn Nicholson in a previous YouTober video because she was the one that created the YouTober series. Her podcasts are really awesome. One of the reasons that I actually found Kalyn's channel originally was from one of her Coffee Talk videos. So I was really excited when she created this Coffee Talk podcast. She talks about just really good episodes for personal growth, personal development, lifestyle, kind of just all that good type of stuff. She does a hint of spirituality every once in a while, but a lot of it's more productivity, mindset, growth, that kind of stuff. So that's her podcast. The next podcast I want to talk about is the She Podcast by Jordan Lee Dooley. Now, I love this podcast. She does have a little bit of a more religious hint to her episodes, but I don't think it's overbearing in any way, shape, or form. She's not pushy at all with that. She talks more in a faith-based type of style rather than more specific on her belief system, which I think is really cool. So it's very relatable. She just always gives such a good perspective on if you are someone that's kind of a multi-passionate type of businesswoman. Really, really great episodes for that. The next podcast I want to talk about is actually one of the first podcasts I started regularly listening to, and it is called Her Best Fucking Life by Sarah Ordo. I originally found Sarah Ordo through her sobriety story. I believe I found her Facebook group before I found anything else, and then I started reading her books after that. Really just am so inspired by her story. I'm so inspired by what she does, and she actually does have a YouTube channel as well. So I just love how real she is. She's very blunt, she's very honest, and she's very just real in the sense that she's not going to BS you in her episodes. She talks about all kinds of things, not just sobriety. She talks a lot about kind of the women empowering women style of movement, I wowould say. And she also talks about just how to up-level your life, grow into more of who you are, I think is a good way to explain it. I think she really goes into detail about how to own who you are, and I think that that's really cool. So I definitely check out her show if I'm looking for kind of that no BS, kick in the pants kind of a deal. She's definitely the one that I go to for that. Podcast I wanted to talk about was the Mindset, Magic, and Manifestation podcast by Mikayla J. I actually found her through Sarah Ordo's podcast, so that Her Best Fucking Life podcast. I found her Mikayla J's podcast through that. So she was actually interviewed on Sarah's podcast, and then I went over to her podcast from there. She's very spiritual heavy, so she does talk a lot about spirituality, about crystals, about tarot cards, journaling, manifestation, all of that stuff. Very magical, spiritual type of a feel, but I absolutely love it. I have just found myself really aligned when I am listening to her podcast episodes, and I have found them so helpful. They're very actionable steps that you can take to apply these different manifestation techniques into your own life. It's not so much you just sitting there listening. You can actually actively apply those things to your daily life, which I think is really cool. The last podcast that I wanted to talk about was the Minimalists Podcast. This podcast was, I think, the first one I ever downloaded. I think this was my first taste into the world of podcasting. At first, I was not super into it because the episodes were so long, but I've kind of found as I've grown listening to podcasts more frequently that I can just listen to snippets and not have to listen to the whole thing in one go. Whereas I think in the beginning, I really felt like I had to get the whole episode in. So I've definitely gotten more into the Minimalist Podcast as I've progressed. Their voices are just very smooth and easy to listen to, and their audio is really good. That's the other thing for me that's really big with podcasts, is if the audio is really messed up, I like cannot deal with crappy audio when I'm listening to a podcast. I definitely feel like with their podcast, I really like that the audio is very good. It's usually they're very well spoken too, so it's just very easy listening. I definitely judge people's podcasts based on if I want to continue listening to them based on their audio, honestly, because if I'm in my car and I can barely hear them, I'm not gonna keep listening. Just as kind of an overall review of everything. So I really love the Minimalist Podcast for things all centered around minimalism, living simpler. I love listening to Kalyn's Coffee Talk if I'm just looking for like a good productive boost in my day and kind of just a little bit of inspiration. That's what I turn to Kalyn's Coffee Talk podcast for. The Her Best Fucking Life podcast by Ordo. Love that one if I need a little kick in the butt to get moving. And like I said, it's very no BS style of a podcast. And then I also love the Mindset, Magic, and Manifestation podcast for all things spirituality, spiritual growth, manifestation, all of that. And then I also love the She podcast by Dooley, just as an overall life podcast. She really talks about so many things and I've just found it really relatable, and it's just good listening. She always has good people that she interviews. It's always a very positive, uplifting type of a podcast. So those are my top favorite podcasts. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to subscribe. We are moving right along through YouTuber. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up or drop a comment below if you have a really good podcast that's kind of personal development, personal growth related. I love listening to new podcasts too, so I would love to hear what you listen to. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye guys.